Hello, Brian. I'm here and I'm happy. So, this is the mic test for Berkeley Community Media, Zoning Adjustments Board, March 28th, 2019. Don't forget, Monday is April Fool's Day. Oh. So I'm going to go back into the control room and check Cablecast to make sure that we're sending Minimac to Caption Encoder. Let me know what you need. Yeah, you either get a busy signal or, well, okay, okay. Oh,
Hello, Jim.
germs everywhere.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening, Allison. Hi. How was your dinner? My dinner was good. I'm not excited about leaving. Okay, bye. This is the second night in a row you had a meeting. Last night? I had to go to Jay Sizzle last night. Oh. And no. Shower night. Yeah. Yeah, I'm super pouty this morning about these shoes he wants to wear, and I'm like, no, so he was being bad, and Cam was being a jerk, and then Jay was being a jerk back. I was just like, I gotta go. So then tonight, Cam was still pouty, but negotiated something about the shoes, and then we're a little bit better.
I'm hoping, I think so. They should only have one item marked out. I don't know. I don't think they'll spend 4 hours on it.
Hello, Leo.
Hi. So I just told the people outside, the security guards, that we're not gonna spend 4 hours talking about one item.
Yeah, I said.
So I'm hoping I can keep that.
I can't imagine that. I mean, I was like, maybe 9 o'clock. I'm not trying to like get your hopes
Well, I
up,
wasn't gonna
but
tell them
who
anything. I
knows?
was like, 4 hours, that seems excessive for one item.
And I was like, I should be, I'm like, you know what, I'm not even gonna say when I should be
Yeah.
on by, and
He's
Jake's
like,
like, I wouldn't believe you anyway.
You're saying your track record hasn't been great?
He's like, you don't know, I'm like, I don't know. I'm telling you also how he's like, okay, good night, oh, it's a shower night, and they're all like, oh. Take a shower.
Is it a wash your hair night as well?
You know, it is, because there's only, when he does swimming,
Oh,
Cool.
swimming is like the ultimate shower. on
Yeah,
Sunday.
yeah, it's the best bath.
So, and then you have to shower after, and that's kind of fun, because you're at the Y, and you get to be by yourself and like kind of be independent in the, locker room. But at home, so then you only, so then he just needs to take one more shower, either on a Wednesday or Thursday.
How many days is he swimming?
Just one.
Okay. Okay, good. You know, every other day. Yeah.
Twice a week.
Twice a week,
You
it's
shower
good.
twice a week, you're good.
Yeah, it's not like it's summertime, he's not sweating every day.
Yeah.
He may or may not be.
You know, he's young.
He may or may not be wearing the same, like, really it's a way just to make sure
Before
that he
puberty,
changes his
it's like,
underpants.
Yeah, that's all I did.
That's a lot of information, sorry Camden for sharing.
I wonder if kids all around the world knew what their parents talked about.
Wow.
Because it comes up in different ways when you try to like lay it around her, like we should talk about
weird.
this. No, it's not weird for like, as Caleb, like, and it's, in my version, it was taught by the health teacher, it was also a gym teacher, and he hates his gym teacher, he's like, what? And then I could tell like something was going on, I'm like, oh, they don't show you sex, like it's in a book. And he was like,
Oh.
and then
Animations, drawings.
I was like, no adult should ever.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah,
Good
they
segue,
would,
Mom.
like they would probably go to jail, and like they would absolutely go to jail.
Yeah,
smart.
good job. Yeah, they
And
would.
he was like, I learned at school by watching a teacher.
That sounds so scary.
See what
You
you
know,
would
there are
think, and he would see why you
You're
would
young,
think that.
there's things that you don't understand and you misinterpret, and I have a few that I'm not gonna tell you, but there were
want it on
On production.
production switch here.
There's this one.
Now let me see if I can see it.
Okay.
In that regard, like,
That's, every generation tries a little bit more, right?
yeah, that's the plan. I'm not saying we're perfect, I'm just saying that. And it's also easier now because there's no like, it's not like he's gonna do it, like, you know, it's like,
Low stakes.
yeah, no stakes. You know, you talk with him when he's 18 after everything's already been done.
Well, this is a
Yes.
problem we've had the last two nights.
Where doesn't?
It doesn't
show
come
up?
into the control room. Is there a toggle in your laptop between display and
Oh,
something else?
actually, this did, like,
Do you have PowerPoints tonight?
actually, no, so,
Okay.
but for the
Then if you-
future,
I mean, it would be nice to
Yeah.
have something
make sure.
up there, but.
I have a
Yeah.
25-page PowerPoint.
Especially during the council.
You don't work with those really long presentations, you know, 50 slides.
This should be, I
Well,
don't
we
think
changed
this should be a smaller, manageable meeting.
I'll look.
Okay,
This
is
is-
this not showing up?
Yeah, you would just have
This is
PDFs
4,
of
right?
that.
Yeah, it's, plugged into laptop 4.
Yeah, okay.
You think if I sit here right in the front again with big enough puppy dog eyes, they might pull me up again?
Not if some of them.
Tell me more about your puppy dog eyes.
I was just so crazy the last time, just,
So I've been quoting to my friends and my family for the last 2 weeks that the opening statement was, I feel like my humanity has been stripped. Because that really resonated for the coffee shopping.
Is that what he said?
Yes,
Oh,
he's been
that's
stripped
like-
of his
You
humanity.
know what, I
Oh.
wonder if I even wrote that down, I was like, sometimes.
It really struck me, and I just had to share it with, you know, my friends and family who still don't understand what I do and why I'm up till midnight on Thursday night.
And this was the guy, the appellate?
that was the
It
craziest.
was an appellate.
So that like the humanity,
I understand
or was
what
that
you
something at
said,
the end?
but that just seems intense.
I don't, you missed the 2211 Harold Way where someone felt like they were being raped by that large.
I heard that, I heard that.
Oh my god.
Oh, that was, I got, you remember that night. I got 5 texts from women I know very well who were watching, who were like, one of them said, there is a special place in hell for that woman. That is not okay. And I'm sorry that that was said to you. Because she said it to me. So,
Yeah, and because,
I
you
was
know, as
like-
a Berkeley resident, I like saw her at a BAMFA thing, like they had like the opening or something, and she was there with her family and like dance and whatever, I was like,
that's the hyperbole in this town is shocking.
yeah, that was, yeah,
It needs to be said.
there's a little gem in every meeting.
Or
We should-
9.
Yeah, that's like the quote of the night, my humanity.
That strong, that statement.
Appellate, I think I have.
I think that's what our self-eventually fire is by posting those things. So, I started us off on the wrong foot, I've taken it to another level, I apologize.
This, you can talk about that?
You don't know.
Is Sulowski not here tonight?
No.
Oh, I didn't.
We have 3 absences.
That's my happy dance.
Sheehan, Solosky, and Jody.
Oh, okay.
I have a shot.
Again,
I have a shot. We have a
Do
shot.
you want to take bets?
No, no. But Sulowski and Sheehan are the ones that would keep me from going earlier if they could.
These didn't get date stamped, but I guess.
No,
We should date
I'm
I
sorry.
can follow behind you and date Santa.
I just haven't changed the date on it.
Where is it?
Sorry, never mind.
All right.
I'll do it, it's fine.
Okay. Well, look, we have a new, different person. Good evening. Welcome
I'm
to.
just here to, hopefully, the board agrees with the planning commission and approves our zoning adjustment.
There's nothing in front of us that relates to the planning commission, and we have 2.
I mean, the zoning adjustment board,
Okay, we have 2 alcohol spirit items on consent.
we're one of them,
All
I think.
right. Hi, I'm Shannon Allen.
I'm John Lopez, but I'm here for Doug Miller, who's the owner of Tap House,
Okay,
which is one of them.
okay. And so those items, if you get both of consent just means the staff
We could either be out of here in maybe 45 minutes for the whole thing, or we could be here until midnight.
Yeah, like, I left the house going, I'm gonna be alright.
I
And I
learned
was like,
to not,
you don't know. I don't.
You have no idea.
Yeah, so if somebody comes in or the ZAB for whatever reason has concerns, they pull it off consent, then you'll probably wanna speak on it and say good things about the project. We're a little loose, so you'll fill out a green card either before or after you speak, and,
Oh, the card.
yeah, there'll be a staff, if it gets close on consent, I'll make a
oh, wait
presentation.
till Allison gets back.
The applicant will make a presentation,
Oh, there we go.
talk about it for a couple minutes. But again, hopefully it stays on. Fingers crossed.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you very much,
you
Shannon.
bet. That's our ZAB spiel for the evening.
That's the deal.
Yeah.
Mark wants to hear it too.
Yes, Mark, if you,
Please.
your item's not on consent, Mark. Your item's on discussion.
I know. My items are always special.
They are special. That's why you get hired.
This client is funny. I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah, they don't like me. He said the 2 times that I've been before the ZAB in the last 12 years, they've denied my projects. Like, oh.
Leslie sent me an email at the end of the day today that I thought related to Hearst. And like, oh, they want to do blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what? And I just started laughing. And then I was like, oh, you're talking about a different project. Never mind. It's like, I got to read the Hearst.
Did they read that first? Right?
Yes. Leslie finished the staff report. I have to read it tomorrow. And then it's going through this.
Did you get new conditions from the rent board yet?
I haven't touched it. I've had
Okay,
a
I
hell
need
of
to
a
make
week.
sure, because I'm gone all next week. I gotta send me
Yeah.
an email and make
Everybody
sure
does
she's
spring break?
checking in on it.
Yeah, Mark's got, we're all
Are
public
you on
school.
spring break too, Miss?
Yeah, everybody's with kids at BUSD is on break
Yeah.
next week.
Are you here next week? Are you guys going anywhere?
We have friends coming to town, so we may get up to the snow 1 or 2 days, but mostly we're here.
Nice.
I'm getting nervous that none of my ZAB members are here.
Did they forget about us, or did they go to the old site? They used to park in the MLK Park.
I know, like, I felt like I was running
I
late.
feel like I think I saw somebody on by that one.
Okay.
Talking.
I talked to Charles today to make sure he was good. He had an unexcused absence last night, but, all right, I'm gonna finish reading these folks. All right,
Okay, there's a ZAB member. There's one.
Got one.
like, where's our ZAB members?
I don't know.
Trish is representing.
All right.
Hi, Teresa.
Okay. Unanimous decision to
What?
adjourn?
Shannon Allen and I worked
Now that the sun is out, everyone's like, is enticed.
Well, yeah, because 2 weeks ago, the time hadn't changed, had it? Or had it? Just changed.
I think it just had.
which means that
It just had.
Like, I think it was the Sunday before.
review the application, go to staff report for approval. We felt like it was pretty clear that it should be approved. So it's on consent, and the only way it gets pulled off consent is if the zoning adjustment board has.
There's Igor.
We haven't heard.
Oh, yeah.
For a little while.
So
Were you here?
Wait, you were there?
Oh, what did you have?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's got them twice already, huh?
And I think it's not staying until that zoning adjustment board goes on, but if it stays on consent, and basically if it's on consent, it gets approved without discussion.
Because they were talking about the RV parking.
Against that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the tactic.
Oh, really?
You have a little memo that, I didn't get it to lay out in time for the report that explains the changes that we made. So you guys could just throw this all on the consent calendar and be done at 7:20.
If they get here by 7.
I was in college, we used to give professors 20 minutes. You got 20.
That was always the rumor. People say, no, that's how it is. Like, are you sure? And then you had to convince enough people to leave with you.
Right, exactly.
Because we never got confirmation that that was a policy.
Well, it wasn't a policy.
Yeah.
It was our courtesy. Yes. Okay, we can push. Oh, you're right. So we could. We can have that as a condition. Okay. We could also, yeah, okay. Well, we gave ourselves a little more room by pulling the hallway into it, and we could skinny up that bedroom just a little. A little. Actually, yeah, it's pretty tight, but we would make it work. Because probably what I will end up telling him to do anyways is move the bigger sink counter to the right to create more space in between the toilet sink tub area.
I think ours is clean because there is no cold floor.
Hey, guys.
Could you say yes, please? Thank you.
Hey.
It is annoying when you're like, when you prepare for rain and then it doesn't. Looks like. Oh, yeah. Yeah, bike seats definitely. And produce, we're keeping your produce fresh. True. You know if it's like lettuce or something. Yeah. So yeah, trash. Or if you get leftovers, like, you go food and leftovers.
Should I go tell Charles we're waiting for him?
Yeah, we talked to them. Chat.
And he's outside.
We have one more person coming.
Yeah, Charles, I did see Charles outside. That means quorum. That
Carrie,
means everything
where's
has to
Carrie?
pass by 5. All right then. You have a gavel? You have a gavel?
Okay.
It was sitting here and I moved it.
If there's 5 out of 6, is that enough?
I will double check my rules.
Because then no one has talked to Board Member Olson? All right, let's start. She'll get here when she gets here. All right, we call the meeting to order. We have a quorum, barely. Just give me a second to get organized. All right, let's do roll call. Okay. Board Member Tregu.
Present and no ex parte.
Board Member Clark. Here, no ex parte. Board Member Khan.
Here, no ex parte.
Vice Chair Pinkston.
Present, no ex parte.
And Chair O'Keefe. Present, no ex parte. Okay, we're all here and we do have a quorum. 5 is enough.
Coalition of the willing.
What? Coalition of the Willing? Yeah. Okay, so is there anyone here wishing to speak on non-agendized items? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda changes. We've got 2 items on consent, 1 item on action. Okay, Igor?
I'd like to move the consent calendar, and if appropriate, I just had one question on 2518 Durant, and I don't want to move it off consent to ask that question.
Is it a clarifying question for staff?
It is a clarifying question for staff.
Let's hear it.
Okay. So somewhere I read the use permit to when it discusses hours of operation, and I thought that by right the CT area allows for operations which are either, I can't remember now if it's 24 hours or if it, I guess with alcohol permit, it would end at 2 a.m., but I thought that could be granted by right and would not require a specific use permit.
Yes, sort of. So in Table 4 for the development standards for the Durant project, it does say 24 hours, 7 days a week. So that's you're right, that's the default for the district. When a use permit comes in, if they specify their hours of operation, in this case because it is a billiards hall, restaurant, they requested 11 a.m. to 2 a.m. If they wanted to change those hours of operation, I guess I'm not comfortable off the top of my head saying that would be a ZC because there is alcohol, there's conditions of approval then related to the timing for alcohol that we would need to coordinate in some way. But if it was like just a simple restaurant or if it was just a store or something and they wanted to change their hours of operation to match the hours for the district, they could do that with a zoning certificate.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Good. Okay. I'm sorry, did you want to move the consent
Yes.
calendar?
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote on the consent calendar. Are the minutes included in that?
Yes.
Okay. They are. Great. Should we do voice vote?
Yes, please. Board Member Tregu.
Yes.
Board Member Clark.
Yes.
Board Member
Yes.
Khan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pinkston.
Yes.
And Chair O'Keefe.
Yes. Okay, the consent calendar is approved unanimously. That means 2518 Durant and 3212 Adeline have your use permits. They're appealable to the City Council. And the minutes are passed. So now we move on to action calendar, 1711 Martin Luther King Jr. Way. We can start with the staff report.
Good evening, Chair O'Keefe and members of the ZAB. At the last ZAB hearing on March 14th, the ZAB opened the public hearing for use permit and variance number ZP 2018-0189 for 1711 Martin Luther King Jr. Way. Staff presented the project, followed by the applicant, and there was no public comment. The ZAB discussed the project briefly and provided direction to staff as well as the applicant. One of the items directed to staff was to provide clarification of the existing parking on the lot. It was determined that the driveway and curb cuts are currently remaining on the site as they are pending removal per the ZAB's approval from May of 2018. So currently there are no spaces required for the 6 existing dwelling units and the commercial floor area. Staff was also asked to prepare findings and condition for approval for the ZAB's consideration. This is an attachment to your staff report. And the applicant was directed to revise the floor plan of the proposed unit, which is also an attachment to the staff report, and also the applicant provided some supplemental information right before the hearing. The request for use permit and variance is to replace an approximately 800 square foot non-conforming commercial space with one dwelling, and grant a variance to provide more dwellings than the district allows for the lot of this size. So that would be a total of 7, where the maximum for this lot is 3, and there are currently 6. The variance also requests to provide less than the minimum amount of usable open space, 700 square feet, where 1,500 is required, and waive parking for this additional unit so that no parking is provided on the lot. The site consists of 2 detached 2-story buildings and currently does not comply with the R2A district requirements for density, usable open space, maximum lot coverage, setbacks, or off-street parking. The existing office use is a non-conforming use, as office is not permitted within the R2A zoning district. No other changes are proposed to the front building or to either floor of the rear building. As mentioned, a previous use permit was approved by the ZAB in May 2018 to legalize the conversion of commercial spaces and additional dwelling units. A key basis for the ZAB to grant or support those variances was that the project would retain existing rent-controlled units. As discussed in the staff report, staff does not find that finding number 1 can be made in order to grant the variances, as there are not exceptional or extraordinary circumstances.
Is that an Amber Alert? Sorry to interrupt.
I'm not sure what that is. There was one earlier.
Okay. If there's an emergency that we need to know about, please someone let me know. Otherwise, continue.
As I was saying, there are not exceptional or extraordinary circumstances present at this site that are not generally present for other sites, buildings, or uses in the same district. Staff also does not find that finding number 2 can be made as granting of the application is not necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights of the subject property's owner. Staff does not find, excuse me one second. Staff believes that the ZAB could make the finding number 3 regarding the parking variance for the additional unit. However, disagrees that granting the variance would preserve or protect affordable housing as stated by the applicant. Staff continues to recommend that the ZAB adopt the findings of denial. Denial would maintain the existing non-conforming commercial floor area within a residential zoning district and would be consistent with the high standard created by the zoning ordinance for the granting of exceptions, and would ensure that non-conforming density, deficient open space, and parking is not worsened. The ZAB also has the prepared findings of approval and conditions of approval before them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for staff? Denise?
I am quite familiar with the criteria for variance findings. The question I have is, what public policy goal is achieved by denying the variance? In other words, by sticking to the letter of the variance practice, which is typically that you wouldn't be able to make these findings. Because I think the public policy goal, the countervening public policy goal, not that this is a variance finding, is that you would provide a unit of housing during a housing emergency, during space that's essentially useless, unrentable commercial space, and you convert it to something that people actually need in Berkeley immediately. So I'm curious what the rationale is for sticking to the letter of the variance interpretation, given that ZAB explicitly asked you to make the findings to approve the variances at the last hearing, and show us what that would look like.
So I'll start, and you can certainly chime in. Pardon me. So it's part of it is law that in a court of the legal interpretation of the required findings, and part of it is consistency across other projects. So those are.
So it has to do with the perfect, which is making the variance findings as typically required, could be the enemy of the good which would be allowing a housing use in a relatively unusable commercial space.
Yes, and
Okay.
as you know, we've got findings of approval have been drafted at the ZAB's direction, and the findings of denial were carried forward from the last meeting as well.
Yep. And then when the applicant comes up, staff has an alternative recommendation. So when you speak to us about this, would you please address the alternative recommendation of staff, which is to come back with a residential use that doesn't require the variances?
Okay, other questions for staff? Yeah, Teresa.
So I can't remember, was this building, when was the building built originally again? It was 1920s? Somewhere in
It
there.
was the early 20th century.
And there were some additions made to the building form
Correct.
between now and then.
Between then and now, yes, and the ZAB approved the subsequent conversion of spaces to dwelling units last year.
And that's basically the building we're seeing now on sheet A1 is just the first floor?
Yes.
So we don't
it's
have
remained mostly the same for the last 50 years.
Okay, so the last 50 years. So the units or the building, the entire square footage was existing prior to 1978?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay. Igor?
Thank you. I'm not sure if staff can answer this. If not, I will ask the applicant this question. I'm going back to the rent board memo dated January 25th, 2018. And what I'm trying to ascertain is the proposed unit for the unit proposed for conversion from commercial to residential. If that is the unit coded as 1711 MLK Junior Way, Apartment E, or if it is one of the units coded commercial. And if so, regardless, if there was any documented history of prior tenancies in that unit.
To my knowledge, this space was not documented as Unit E. However, the applicant could correct me if I'm mistaken. There has not been any residential, any residents occupying this space. So the memo is referring to the spaces that were legalized last year.
Okay, and then a follow-up question, and this is similar to what I asked 2 weeks ago, but it was late in the hour, and I just wanted to get on the record an answer just in case I may have not followed the answer previously. Staff is recommending, instead of granting the variances, that an expansion of the existing residential unit be done to achieve the same purpose, if I understand correctly. And how, if at all, if this were to happen, would that affect the controlled status of the existing residential unit, or has the rent board been consulted about what it would mean for the sitting tenants to expand the residential unit, what it would mean in terms of potential increase in rent due to the expanded available services in the unit?
So that option was, the rent board was not consulted for that option because the applicant had stated that they were not open to pursuing that option. The previous approval from 2018 included conditions regarding the consultation of the tenants who are existing and occupying existing units. So thus, due to the applicant's kind of non-interest in that option, it was no longer pursued.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions for staff?
Excuse me, one last question. I appreciate that you guys are in a little bit of a bind here. You obviously want more housing for our citizens, but you're also obligated, given your position as paid employees of the city of Berkeley, to interpret the code the way it's written. And I respect that. This board has a little more latitude in terms of how we interpret the variance findings. I personally think that finding one, in my opinion, could be made on the basis of the character of the building historically, a commercial building which has effectively gone through a rezoning of some kind where it no longer can be used commercially. I think is an exceptional circumstance in my personal opinion, and I'm here to express my opinion, which you can't do. I also think that the second finding could be found on somewhat related grounds, on the basis that the property owner could continue, I presume, to lease that space as a non-code compliant office, but would be obligated to continue functioning his building or her building in a capacity which is not code compliant. And people should have the opportunity in our fair city to live and use their properties in a way that is code compliant. And I think that if we were to pass this, we would ensure that property right of the owner. Now, I know I'm probably stretching here, but I can stretch. So if my colleagues agree with those stretches, can we approve this tonight?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I was about to bust you on not asking a question, but you pulled one out at the end. Okay, further questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, let's hear from the applicant. We don't have any speaker cards, is that correct?
Just mine and
right.
all the people who don't want this project. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for your time again tonight. We'll try to keep this relatively brief. And, you know, I believe that 2 weeks ago we provided ample findings. They're very well lay out the special and extraordinary circumstances around this. We did also go in and make the main common living space a little bit bigger by shrinking up a couple of the bedrooms. We enclosed more space into the bathroom area by pulling in the end of the hall, and then we tried to turn the kitchen around the corner a little bit and use the under stair space for the refrigerator and things of that nature, so it functions more as a great room and doesn't clog up the access to the back door as much. My client is not interested in a 7 or 8 bedroom apartment, which is what you would end up with if you did the use permit route. It's just not feasible for them. They'd like to have a separate apartment. This space has never been used for residential in the last 50 plus years. It's been a storefront. In fact, board member Olson's father, I think, that was his architectural office space for a while. So it goes way, way back. And I can't remember if you asked me to address anything else, but I'm happy to try and want to move along this project because, again, there's nothing we can do short of demolishing everything on the site to bring it into conformance with zoning standards. The opportunity, again, that we have tonight is to bring a non-conforming use into legally conforming use. And I think that that, as a board member has expressed, is the opportunity that we have to create a dwelling unit at a time that we really badly need them.
Igor and then Teresa.
Thank you, Mark, for responding to my questions. I just have one final question. Have you abided, or has the owner you represent abided by the conditions specified in the previous approval based on the rent board memo dated in 2018 about maintaining all the legalized units to rent control provisions?
Oh, you bet. And the building permitting is in process for that. And we wanted to wait for the outcome of this before they roll it all up together and pull out the driveway and the approach and all that kind of stuff. So,
Thank
yes.
you.
And I think that the unit E that you were referring to was the space behind this space that was one of the units legalized in the last round. And,
oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Teresa?
How long has the current owner owned the property, approximately?
I don't know. I think I don't even want, I know that he's owned it, they have owned it for at least, I want to say 10 years, but I'm not sure.
And who was the commercial tenant
Most recently, they've had psychotherapists in there. Psychotherapists taking smaller rooms in there.
Okay.
So if you look at the existing floor plan, you can kind of see how those offices are laid out. They're small individual offices.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions for the applicant? Okay, you can sit down. I just want to make sure we don't have anyone wishing to speak from the public. Okay, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back for board comments. We'll go Teresa, then Igor.
You know, one of the things, we have a lot of properties, you know, in our city that have been, you know, that were built many years ago, and then our zoning code comes around and then imposes this new set of rules on them. And the form of the buildings don't usually change much, but then our use permits and all our thing that we laid on after the building was built and was functioning for many, many years. And to me, I think, to me, that's a unique characteristic for a property. So that's, when I'm looking at these, and that's one of the reasons I supported the property on Walnut, or I did not go with the vote on the Walnut Avenue project, because, you know, I look at the form of the building. Has the building really changed that much, and has the building envelope and the, you know, the physical aspects of the building really changed? And so this, in this case, it hasn't. But they are converting a commercial space to a residential space. And if this residential space had been, this space had been residential in this form, you know, it would have been a rent-controlled unit. And so, you know, I would feel comfortable converting this commercial space to a unit if the owner was willing to put this unit under rent control. And because I do believe that it would have been, you know, a rent-controlled unit if this had happened in the past when the building was built. So in terms of how, you know, we come to the conclusion of if we're giving this variance, you know, it seems like it should comply with some kind of rule that we had in the past, maybe, you know. Anyway, that's kind of the way my logic is going.
Igor's next, but can we, I don't think we can do that, put it under rent control. I think that's a violation of Costa-Hawkins. Okay, well, maybe staff would comment on that, but Igor's next.
It was built before 1970?
Well, if the applicant is willing to voluntarily put it under rent control, I would be happy to incorporate it into my motion, but I was going to make a motion to approve this project and grant the variances that are proposed. I do understand where staff is coming from. I cannot and do not blame staff for really following the provisions of the zoning code. And perhaps this is another reason that we need to think about changing our antiquated and at times self-contradictory code. But the thing that, the main element here which makes me comfortable about moving to grant this approval is the fact that if this was any other configuration, whether in the most extreme case, we would have to demolish this unit and build a compliant unit or building from the ground up, which, by the way, would or might not be under rent control. Or if we were to take an existing rent-controlled unit and change its configuration and thereby perhaps drive the existing tenant occupying that unit towards having to pay a higher rent ceiling cost, because inherently there would be a change in services. There would be a change in the square footage of the unit itself. I think this does provide an additional residential unit, and it does not change the inherent rights of the existing tenants in the rent control units that have been approved and made for the Berrien decision of 2014 to remain under rent control even if there is a new certificate of occupancy, which simply legalizes the use that this building was under, or the majority of this building was under before. So with that in mind, I was not here for the Walnut decision that is now, as I understand, under appeal to the City Council, so I can't speak to that. But in this case, I think what we are able to do is clear, and I am very comfortable making a motion and voting on the side of providing existing tenancy opportunities in Berkeley.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. Further comment?
And can we add a condition that the bathroom and the front entry, which needs to be handicapped accessible? So that unit has to be handicapped accessible. It's on the ground floor. They're going to need to comply with the accessibility standards. Even though I'm not sure, but anyway, I would want that to be a condition. And even though it might not be required by the building code, I think that this unit should be handicap accessible. I still don't love the design of the unit. They did make some improvements, but the private patio, the kitchen is still very tight, and the private patio is not accessible right now. So the door would only be accessible if you had an automatic door opener on that particular door. Anyway, I would want the entire unit to be handicapped accessible.
Could I comment on, or should we?
Well, first I'd like to find out if that's acceptable to the motion maker and the seconder.
Sure, I'm happy to invoke Hank's rule for those of you who were here when it came about.
And wait, I'm sorry, the seconder, is that okay with you?
In concept, yeah, I want to hear if Charles has some other.
I appreciate Hank's rule. We talk about it a lot here, and I appreciate Teresa's intention here. This is a ground floor unit. If it were a new unit, it would have to be ADA adaptable. The concern I have as an architect who has to design these bathrooms that are adaptable is that we have small bedrooms in this existing facility. I do think that this actually contributes to affordable housing. It's affordable by design. These are tiny bedrooms in with a somewhat compromised kitchen. They're not going to be able to demand the same kind of rents for these bedrooms that they do at Parker Place. If this were a 3-bedroom facility, they would be able to. And I think that requiring them to make the bathroom accessible would make the bedrooms so small that they would be compelled to only have 3 bedrooms. So I'd rather get another bed for a head, you know.
But that's not true. He said he could do it earlier.
Oh, he said he could do it?
Well, it would result in much smaller bedrooms.
Mark, you're not coming up on the microphone. We can reopen the public hearing for your thoughts on this.
I'm sorry.
It was only going to be one of the bedrooms. Bedroom number 1 was going to be narrowed by about, I would say, 18 inches.
So that would make that an 8-foot wide bedroom.
Okay. That's adequate. It's not great, but that's adequate. As long as we have 4 bedrooms, I'm happy. I'll support the motion as modified.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, so that's acceptable to the motion maker and the seconder?
Yes.
Yes, Igor, you already stated.
Yes.
Okay.
I just would like to bolster our findings a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah, that was my next question. Staff has come up with some findings, and then some alternate findings have been suggested. So, you know, I actually have some things to say about this, but I'm going to wait till I know what findings we're voting on. Igor, could you, since you made the motion, do you want to articulate what findings you would like to make?
Yeah, and I think this is, let's see, I'm looking for the right place for this finding right now, but it's the one that speaks to the preservation of existing land-controlled units. I think being very intentional on the part of staff about including verbiage that any other configuration that I can foresee being done would drive sitting tenants of existing land-controlled units to pay a higher rent that they may or may not be able to afford. So there's a very compelling reason to do this because it avoids displacement of sitting tenants in land-controlled units.
Yeah, Igor, this has to specifically respond to the variance findings 1, 2, and 3. Which one does that respond to?
I am looking for it right now. My apologies, I never received my packet.
So I would suggest that you put it in finding 1, and that, which is there has to be a physical extraordinary circumstance that's tied to the land and the building. In this case, the physical extraordinary circumstance is the current rent control occupancy of existing tenants that are behind a wall. And although you could leave it as commercial space, given that we're looking at expanding the residential, there's no way to make this unit zoning compliant as to use without a variance unless you tear down the wall, which puts the tenants at risk. So I think that confluence of extraordinary circumstances allows you to make a finding which otherwise is typically just the size of the lot or some physicality of it.
Yeah, and if you want a specific location, I have it up now. Under variance finding 2C, staff briefly discusses the conversion of an existing non-conforming commercial space to be an additional dwelling unit, and whether this is placed as a separate finding or a continuation of discussion under 2C, either would be an appropriate place for it, in my opinion.
And I think you can add the status of that existing rental unit under both finding 1 and finding 2. Under finding 1, it has to do with the physicality of the existing occupancy and
that it's currently occupied.
That it's currently occupied by rent-controlled tenants, and that any other reuse of that space as to bring it into zoning compliance. In other words, if you reuse the commercial space as a residential use, unless you grant the variance, you got to take down the wall, which puts the tenants at risk, and that's an unusual confluence of physical circumstances that allow you to make the first finding.
It's extraordinary?
It is extraordinary. I can't recall ever in my years on the ZAB having anything like this.
Okay. Got that, staff? And staff, please let us know if you're comfortable writing up these findings and if they make sense to you. So that's an addition, that's an amendment to finding 2C?
Findings 1 and 2. I would add it to variance finding number 1 and variance finding. So as to the physicality goes in finding 1. In finding 2, it has to do with the substantial property rights of the property owner. So I'm just going through the 4 variance findings right now.
I'm looking on this, so when I said 2C, I was actually on the findings and conditions. Let's just be consistent.
Sorry, different pages. My notes are on the other section.
This is on page 3 of the findings.
2 and 3 of 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just let us know where you are so we can all look at the same thing.
And if you could help explain to me why, when you guys, because you guys seem very supportive of all this, and I'm kind of on the fence, because, you know, on the Walnut Creek, Walnut Avenue one, or Walnut Street, or whatever it is, Walnut, you guys all voted the other way. So I don't quite understand how we can make this and not make, you can make it, not make it there, in terms of the logic.
I'm actually going to take chair's prerogative and step in at this moment. I don't want to make a huge speech about this because I have a feeling that I'm going to be in the minority on this, but I'm not in support of this. I'm going to wait and see what findings you guys come up with and try to have an open mind, but I really don't believe in granting variances unless we really have a strong case for all the findings that have to be made, and I'm not getting that sense right now. When reading staff's findings for approval, they were great. I'm not criticizing. It was a hard thing to do, and I know you guys recommended denial ultimately, but they were not convincing to me. I mean, I think a lot of them were really, really spurious. I'm open to hearing, you know, I'm trying to listen to Denise with an open mind, but it doesn't sound extraordinary to me. Charles had the argument about substantial property rights, that they're renting illegally and they have a right to rent it legally. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think they could go ahead and not rent it. I don't think you have a right to.
Well, you have a right to rent your property. If the zoning code doesn't allow you to rent your property, you're denied substantial property rights. I mean, that's simple.
I think that argument could be stretched for anyone who wanted to rent something that wasn't legal. They could say, they could ask for a variance and say, well, I would like to rent it, so I'm being denied substantial property rights. So I think it's problematic, and you can respond in a moment,
yeah.
but
that wasn't a stretch for me. That
okay.
was like.
Well, we can disagree, that's fine, I think we're about to, which is okay,
No,
we can still be
fine,
friends. But I just, in general, I think that's an example of my larger concern,
Well, what
which
is the enjoyment of
excuse
your
me, I'm
prop-
speaking.
Okay.
Thank you. Which is that variances are very dangerous, slippery slope. We have a zoning code. It is written, it is sacred, and our job is to interpret it as written and I'm not personally comfortable with stretching it. I'm not comfortable with that. And I can see that I'm in the minority and I'm okay with that. But I want to say that, and I'm highly skeptical, but I will listen to these variance findings. Did you want to speak next, Charles? Do you want to respond, and then Igor?
Yeah, I just wanted, first I want to say that I totally respect your position.
Mm-hmm.
You're a strict constitutionalist.
Not really, but more than most.
Yeah,
I am also a lawyer.
I think that's a really important position to have here on the board and all of our governmental positions. I'm very sympathetic with it. But in my mind, the property rights, the happy enjoyment of your property means being able to use it. And if you cannot use it, if you have to use it in a manner that's inconsistent with the zoning code in order to use it, then I'd say you're being denied your property rights. I mean, you have a right when you buy a property, it's guaranteed by the city and by the state to enjoy its proper use, which in this case would be a residential use. That's what the city has dictated is the appropriate use for this property. And they bought this building, they paid for this building, and if we condemn them to using this as an office in the front, they will not be able to use it for the purpose for which it was intended. So I actually think that's an easier argument, even than the first one I made. I really believe this. I mean, that for me is not a stretch. Mm-hmm. But I respect your position, and if you disagree, you know I love you, so it's not a problem.
I have a 90 square foot shed in my backyard. I'd really like to rent it out. I think I'm being denied my substantial property rights.
Was that shed part of was that granted as a right by the city to build that shed?
Yes, it's a by right shed. I would really like to rent it out, though. Too bad I can't. Okay, that's.
Actually, you can if you make it an ADU, but that's a whole other.
It's not habitable space. Okay.
It's a building code violation.
Igor was next. It's not.
Thank you. No comment on that specific example, which is not on the agenda. But I wanted to actually ask staff, given the quorum and who got an excused absence or didn't, how many votes do we need to get an approval? I want to know how hard I need to work to convince the chair. And I completely also respect where you're coming from.
You need 4 votes for action.
Okay, thank you.
I think you should convince Teresa.
So
Well, you know.
I will still try to work hard to earn your 5th vote, even if we don't need it.
Be open-minded.
By simply saying this, and personally, I understand the reason for adding this into the variance for substantial property rights, but what is most compelling to me about this project is the extraordinary circumstances provision. And for those of you who have served on the board with me for a while, you know how closely I have followed the Berrien decision of 2014. And that was the first time that we were able to find a way to legalize unpermitted units that were still registered with the rent board and prevent displacement. And you may also remember, because I served with some of you back in 2015 or 2016 when we had to have we had to take a really difficult vote that I did not want to take, and it was a Faustian deal at the time between permitting an otherwise unpermitted unit, which would grant a new certificate of occupancy, which would essentially, because it was a new certificate of occupancy, drove it to new construction, which means it would no longer be under rent control, which means the lower income tenant in that unit would have to be displaced, or we would have to not grant that use permit, and the effect would still be the displacement of this tenant. So I think the extraordinary circumstance is here we have a property owner that, well, whether they were agreeable to making 6 units remain under rent control or not, that is now the application of the new law. And it's extraordinary that for the first time in decades of Berkeley history, well, certainly since '96 when Costa-Hawkins came into effect, we've been able to do this. What would actually be extraordinary is if in the spirit of trying to not make these variances, but instead making it a use permit, we would have the perverse effect of displacing a sitting tenant because of the physical change to the condition of the unit, as Denise already said. So that is compelling to me. This is where...
Could I clarify?
Teresa, into your microphone. Yeah.
I just want to clarify. I don't quite understand what he's saying, and I think it's important. So you're saying that instead, you're using the staff's alternate recommendation, is what you're saying? Because how if we deny the permit, then it stays as commercial. But you're saying that the staff's recommendation to make a bigger unit is what you're comparing it to, even though that's not something that's on the agenda right now.
Well, it is on the agenda insofar as staff argues in the staff report before us that...
So this findings is for that use permit? Okay.
Had the applicant come to us with a use permit application, we could legally grant it, but it could have the very real effect of displacing at least one sitting tenant.
I just want to make that clear that it's regarding the other option.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
So you guys know I come from a background in current planning where issuing variances is supposed to be hard, nigh on impossible. And in order to make the variance findings, there really does have to be exceptional circumstances. And those can be physical in the form of the ownership, the nature of the neighborhood, and so forth. I find this to be an exceptional circumstance for the following reasons, and ironically, the confluence of exceptionality makes it even more exceptional than what you would typically expect in a zoning variance, which just typically has to do with the physical location of the building on the lot or the physical size of the lot. That's typically what you see in a variance. In this instance, the city has multiple conflicting policy directives that apply to this lot, which predates our zoning by probably 50 years. And the first is that we have a rent control ordinance that directs the city to preserve rental housing and to keep existing tenants from being displaced. The best policy outcome in that law is the currently proposed project. Do not disturb the tenants. Leave them in peace, and moreover, add a rental unit so that other tenants can be served and remain in Berkeley. So the policy direction of the city's rent laws which were voter adopted and again had nothing to do with this particular parcel, would be to do what the applicant is proposing. Then we have the use permit process, which would allow, without a variance, the applicant to come back and make this one big residential unit, as Igor pointed out. But the use permit process that we have, again, yields a worse policy outcome than the current proposed project, which is to create a new residential unit in the front space. And then finally, we have the existing zoning as it applies to this site, rather than just the use permit process, which zones that office for residential uses. Its current use is commercial. So you have a commercial use that's in conflicting circumstances with the underlying residential zoning district. So the physical conflicts and the exceptional circumstances for this property have to do with the fact that Berkeley has a bunch of competing overlapping regulations that disagree as to what the outcome here should be. And this is exactly what the ZAB is called upon to do. This is more than just a stand-up physical variance application. And when our rules conflict, we are asked to try and to adjust for better policy outcomes that are consistent overall with our planning documents, our general plan, our housing element, and all the rest of it. And in that case, our policy documents are clear. The outcome here should be to add a unit of rental housing without displacing the existing tenants. That is the best policy outcome for the totality of the city's adopted policy frameworks, not just the particular physical nature of the zoning district here. So I find it possible to make the variance findings to vary from one of our conflicting codes, which is in this case the physical zoning on the lot, in order to bring the policy outcome here into better conformance with the totality of our policies that pertain to this part of town and to housing in general. So I am quite comfortable that this is exceptional, perhaps not in the fact that the parcel's smaller than all the other parcels on the block, which you would expect to see, but because of this sort of cascading effect of overlapping policy documents that have been adopted and changed over the years that yield a bad outcome in this case if you followed the strict letter of one of the policy documents only, which is the zoning code. So I'm comfortable that this is an extraordinary circumstance. It's an extraordinary both physical and regulatory circumstance, which is even more extraordinary than we typically get. And for those reasons, I'm comfortable making the variance findings. And we can walk through and adapt that line of reasoning to this particular, to the 4 findings if that's helpful. But I also think that background provides color on all of the rest of it. And the only one that is tricky here is the substantial property rights notion. The applicant has offered a finding for that. I think in this instance, there's 3 variance findings, so this is 3. Oh, the applicant one? Yeah, it's in what they submitted, and it's in the staff report. Yes, it's page 11 of 14, finding 2. Granting of the application is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights. The applicant suggested that over the many years, the property was bought and sold with legal non-conforming uses. And the R2A designation, 6 existing dwelling units, supports the conversion of the remaining commercial spaces to comply with zoning use designations, bring the property to a residential only use. I think that's fine, but I do think we need to talk about the notion of the substantial property right in this case. And what I would add is that in order to rent this space as a continued commercial use, the property owner is going to have to make physical improvements to this space over time in order to keep it leased. And today, ground floor retail spaces and these kinds of offices are increasingly less and less valuable and almost useless to a property owner. So it is a substantial loss of the property owner's rights to a residential use in this zoning district to not be able to monetize that residential use zoning by putting a residential use in a commercial space. So I think you can make the finding in that way. So I'm comfortable making all four of the variance findings, albeit though, Shoshana, it is not a black and white situation. And we're having to do machinations that really are a byproduct of what I think are complex overlapping policy documents that are kind of unique in Berkeley. There are very few cities that have had rent control this long. There are very few cities that have so many older buildings that predate their zoning by so many years. And I'm comfortable in this case that we can make the variance findings.
Okay. Igor?
Sorry, can I just ask Denise, you said all four variance findings, but did you mean 3 of the 4 since finding 4 is not applicable to this project?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Further questions?
I have a couple questions.
Yeah, Teresa.
And I think it might be for staff. So how many, it says there's a lot area of 6,000, and there's how many, only 3 units are allowed? I saw in your staff report? And we already granted 6. Right?
That is correct.
So we already granted a variance
Yes.
last time. Okay, and you voted against that?
I'm sure, yeah, I believe so. I never vote for variances. Ooh, what's happening?
Uh-oh.
Hello?
Great.
Someone decided it was.
This happened at J
Come
Sizzle
on.
too.
Dancing,
Okay, thanks, Mark.
dancing, dance. There you go. Every once in a while, you can turn around and dance. Yeah, so for me, let's see, there's 6,000 square foot lot, and there's the total gross floor area of 6,053, right? And so, if you had 3 units on this property, that would be a 2,000 square foot units each. Which is, to me, again, that's why the variance findings to me, because our code is written the way it is, we get a variance here. But in terms of the physical form of the building, I feel that this physical form and the number of people who could live in this property is not really going to change substantially by adding this, converting this unit to commercial. So to me, to me, that's a non-detriment. I don't know where that fits in with all the.
It's kind of in 3. The third finding
Number 3.
is somewhat
So
of a non-detriment
I
finding.
feel that there is, I'm not sure why this is lit here. Anyway, so I just didn't want the echo. So anyway, to me, that's how I can support this, is because of the physical form and the number of people living here. If you had 3 2,000 square foot units, easily could fit in this building. That's 3 families of 4. That's 12, or maybe more. If you have that much square footage in a 2,000 square foot, you could have up to 5 bedrooms in each of those single-family homes. And so the fact that we have, let's say, they're proposing 19 bedrooms, divided by 3, so many bedrooms per unit anyway. So, but the form of the place, it is smaller bedrooms. It's going to possibly be more people than the code intended. But overall, to me, it feels like it fits in with the neighborhood in terms of its physical form and the practical, actual use that it's going to, So anyway, that's how I can support it. I don't know how. I think the general plan also, in terms of what you were saying, Denise, is our general plan would want this, in terms of the housing, and R2A is mostly housing. It's not supposed to be commercial. So I am disappointed, though, that we can't make it a rent-controlled unit. I think that if this was a unit in this building, even though I guess it does historically, when it was built, was it a commercial unit? It sounds like it was. Do we know that? Or was it a residential and then got converted to commercial? That's in its history. Or was it
It was
built in
commercial.
1920 as commercial?
This area was commercial.
Okay, so, you know, we can't say that it was residential, but it was built before 1978. And anything built before 1978 should be rent controlled. But,
I think
so this one's a little harder to stretch.
It's the zoning, the occupancy certificate, I think, is issued
Yes.
after 78. I think
Well,
that's what.
right, but then.
correct?
What you were referring to, Igor, is for existing, you were able to, the law now allows us to keep those as rent controlled.
That's correct.
So, you know, that's kind of my logic is, you know, if something was used as residential space, but this one, I guess, wasn't, but on the Walnut Street one, it was, and that's why I didn't understand why folks didn't want to, you know, approve that one. So maybe you can tell me that later, Denise, why you didn't support that one, because I was the only one wanted to approve it.
I don't remember.
Okay, so anyway, I am willing to support it.
I hope I would.
I do think it's going to be more affordable. I definitely want in order to support it, I would want it to be an accessible unit, not adaptable, accessible.
I have one last comment.
I'm going to let Charles go because he hasn't
Yeah.
gone in a while, if that's all right, and then Igor.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think we can pretty much see the way the vote's going to go, but I'm going to make one last appeal to you, Shoshana, which probably will fail. But you can kind of put it away for future reference.
Okay.
It's the question of why the zoning code allows variances at all. What is the purpose of a variance? What is the wisdom of variances? Why do we feel they're necessary? And I think the answer is, obvious. It's that laws, as well crafted as they may be intended in meeting their purpose and their intent, often have an effect that was not intended. That they, because of circumstances of a particular facility, it's just hard to apply them to that particular location. And this is, in my mind, a very exceptional situation where we've got this existing 6-unit thing and we've got this commercial space in the front, and it's like nothing else that I expect to see. And so to me, it feels like a one-off. It feels like an oddity. And in my mind, that's why we have variances, is to address those issues and to do what it seems the thrust of the code and what its intent is really trying to accomplish, that all these laws that are written to provide zoning regulations, but they couldn't address this particular circumstance. So that's my philosophical position, why I feel good about this.
Okay.
And I still respect you if you don't.
Okay. I think, Charles, let's continue this philosophical
Offline.
discussion after we should just take a vote pretty soon. But Igor would like to speak.
Yeah. Well, the chair actually made me interested in trying to dig up the minutes from the last time that we voted on this project.
Don't tell me I voted for it.
Well,
Did I?
I'm just going to speak to the record so that, yeah, for the Mueller report on you. So on April 12th, 2018, although the vote seems to suggest in the minutes that there were more than 9 ZAP members present, but I think it was a technical error. The vote was basically one against, and that was Commissioner Sheehan, and former Commissioner Brazil Clark was absent, and that was to direct staff to prepare findings and conditions for approval. And then on the actual vote on the approval of the variances, it was moved by Commissioner Olson and seconded by Commissioner Khan and passed with 8 yes votes and no votes. Commissioner Sheehan was not present.
Well, given that there were irregularities, that must be a typo. Or I was drunk. I don't know.
I'll let you draw your own conclusions.
I don't remember, so I have no comment. But thank you for the history, for the fact check, Igor. Okay, so I think, moving on.
Call the question?
Well, I think I want to make sure staff is clear on the findings. Is staff clear on the findings?
Yes,
Yeah?
yes.
Okay. call the question then.
Board Member Khan.
Yes.
Board Member Clark.
Did you accept my
Yes.
handicapped accessible?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Board Member Tregu.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pinkston.
Yes.
And Chair O'Keefe.
No.
4 votes.
And that passes, right?
Correct.
Okay, motion passes. Sorry, Mark. Gotta stand up for the rule of law. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Okay, so you have your use permit, and it is appealable to the city council. And last on the agenda, where's my agenda? We have subcommittee reports. Let me make sure that's the only thing. Yep, that's the only thing. So we have had a meeting of Jay Sizzle last night, in fact. Igor, would you like to give the report? Because I'm a little confused about what happened at the meeting. Did anything happen?
Jay Sizzle for shizzle.
Sizzle?
Yeah, it probably did, just a little bit. So we had a pretty robust discussion. No actions were taken at last night's meeting, but we had an interesting discussion about the framework for what would constitute an objective standard and for approval or denial of projects. Yeah.
We're trying to root out subjective standards, which turns out is most of our code.
Right. So, of course, the challenge is that basic approval or denial determination that has to be made based on a non-detriment finding, which asks a quasi-judicial body to look at everything, including the peace, comfort, and morals of the residents and those doing business in the city. So that is fairly subjective, and if the contention is that decisions could be made in a more understandable, less capricious manner, if there were certain objective criteria. That is what we began to discuss, and we looked at 3 different examples. So those were the 3 SB 35 proposals that developers are required, or applicants are required to provide to staff to make a determination whether as a whole the project is compliant with underlying zoning standards. So we received over 200 pages of matrices parsing out every single applicable provision of the zoning code. And then the applicant's contention of whether or not this would apply. There were very few standards in there that would be considered objective, and so that will be a point for future discussion. I think at the next meeting in 2 months, we are going to be talking about density standards, including discussion of density bonus applications for the base project. And in future meetings, we're going to be talking about things like access to solar or sunlight views. And we also, I think there was a request, and we will be doing research to look at form-based codes, such as the ones being employed by the city of El Cerrito along the San Pablo corridor, and what that encapsulates, and just looking at seeing what other ways there might be to handle these kinds of determinations in a more objective way. I'm sure I missed quite a bit, and so feel free to add to that.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add is, and tell me if I've got this right, we explored this interesting idea of doing away with the sort of tri-level sorting system we have of, you can get a zoning certificate, you can get an AUP, or you can get a use permit. Or was that what it was, or was it public hearing?
Yeah, zoning,
Yeah.
zoning certificate, AUP, and
Was it use permit? Okay, yeah, yeah, public, which is the same as public hearing. So we looked at the, sort of the system we have for what requires what, when what's legal is always what's legal. And we realized that system is inherently subjective. And so that's problematic, and one option is just to do away with it, but what we wanted to look at, or think about looking at, although this is a huge can of worms, is to try to replace that system with some sort of tri-level set of standards. So if you're going to do something that previously required a use permit in a public hearing, maybe instead you have to have a stronger community benefits package that's well-defined. Because the idea is use permits, what we currently have, projects that currently require a use permit tend to have a more intense use and more harm to the community. And so that's why we have an elevated level of oversight. But that's subjective, so maybe instead just say, well, if it's if it's more than 2 stories or whatever, then instead of requiring a use permit, it just has to have more open space or something like that. So sort of replace that system with a set of subjective 3-level standard, or maybe not, maybe 2-level or something like that, but objective standards, yes, thank you. So that was an idea that was mentioned at least, and I thought it was intriguing, and I'm still thinking about it. But it is a big job. But it's a big job no matter what we do, so.
Did you guys discuss design standards at all?
Only to the extent that we agreed that they were completely subjective, and that's a problem.
So there are communities that have design standards that are less about subjective things and more about a continuous street wall, which is a physical, it's kind of like a form-based code, but not quite. And the city could adopt design standards for new residential buildings or multifamily residential buildings much more quickly than they might be able to develop the more complex matrix that you're talking about. And in other parts of California, communities do have these physical design standards that objectively describe the physical characteristics that the zoning tries to achieve through otherwise what is a use of discretion. So it might have a 15-foot base with a reveal or a setback, and windows will be set in 4 inches, and other physical ways of describing buildings, particularly in a community that has a historic architectural vernacular, that would at least get us to some more objective standards with smaller building types, like the duplex, triplex, quads we see in R2, R3 zones, and into the mid-rise buildings that we see that are, before they get into the high rises, which are much harder to do. So that might be something else that you think about. They're more measurable, they're more defined. They can leave room for modernism as long as the modernism allows these various physical characteristics, like a building have a base, a middle, and a top, and they're roughly proportioned, a third, a third, a third. Like that's the thing you can measure and do math around. So I just offered that as another path.
Denise, can I ask what cities in particular have good examples of this? And does their architecture suck, or is it good?
Well, the downside of design standards, I'm sure Charles can explain this more cogently than I can, is that they do tend to yield a more uniform built environment. When you have an objective standard, it means you have to achieve the objective standard. There's less room for variance, right? So if you're in San Francisco, for example, they have residential design guidelines that say things like every 25 feet there'll be a massing break, and you can go up to 25 or 30 feet, and then there needs to be a reveal or something that again breaks the massing. A lot of these are designed to create lack of uniformity in a facade where you can go from the ground straight up with no reveals, no variation. So San Francisco has them, Pasadena has them, the number of communities in the North Bay have them. They all tend to be from communities that have older historic architecture, though. So, and California has many of them. So I'm sure if staff did a search, you'd find them.
Santa Barbara, everything has to have a tile roof, right?
Santa Barbara's goes to everything to say it's got to be mission-style architecture with a red tile roof. Right. Yeah, that would be on this extreme end, but that's an example, yeah.
I wanted to ask about the smaller scale properties, because what I've always wondered, why we have just, building one unit of, is not by right. Let's say just to build a house on a lot. It's not, it's a whole public hearing, and we don't have anything that's by right, hardly. I mean, you can add up to 500 square feet, or maybe it's 499, addition by right. That's the only thing, right? In terms of it.
But it's
Anyway.
I'm sorry, were you asking a specific question?
Yeah, like on the, almost everything requires a public hearing. Every new unit requires a public hearing. So that to me is excessive. So I think I would encourage you to also not just look at the big buildings, because one of the problems we're having is in the smaller residential, the lower density residential districts, because it's all about number of units and not about form and how much, building is on a lot and how much open space is on a lot. And that can be very objective. If you just said, hey, you can build up to a 4,000 square foot of building on here, and you can put it wherever you want on that lot. But we have this idea, it has to be a 20-foot setback, it's very suburban, it's very, why did, some cities you have it going all the way up to the property line. You have row houses. We don't have any row houses in our city. We do not allow row houses. Do we? No, we do not allow that.
Not by right.
Not even by unright.
With 10 use permits.
You can't even do it with a use permit.
By left?
You can't, which is crazy. I mean, there's so many cities that have wonderful townhome, like look at Washington, D.C. and the areas that are older and historic. We love those. If you've ever, I don't know if you've been there, but they're very nice. We don't even allow that here. We're very suburban oriented in terms of a single house on a lot. And I think it does go back to some of this history that was written up in that recent article about, why, as soon as things got a little different, we started making this zoning code, all over the country.
Mm-hmm. Igor.
So thank you for that feedback. I wanted to see, I think maybe reiterate Shoshana's request as well, if Denise might be able to offline send us some examples of cities that have design codes that are objective. And then, I got Santa Barbara as a more extreme example.
Pasadena, Santa Barbara, any planning staff person can locate these quickly.
Yeah, I think my understanding is, so when I requested that staff provide us certain materials for the next meeting, and they will certainly do so, but they're also looking for us to be a working committee, and so they're asking us to take some ownership too over the research we're conducting. So in that light, I will be happy to research the cities that were cited, and if there are other examples, please do share them with us. And then to my colleague's point about single-family homes, I think El Cerrito, that is one that I am going to go back and research more, because I think their form-based code, it encapsulates things like a solar fan. So if there is, basically there's an objective standard in saying this is what the city considers to be a minimizing of impacts, at least to sunlight, potentially other impacts as well. And as long as that proposal is compliant with whatever that standard is, then it can be approved by right. So I think probably the simplest application of that would actually be to single-family homes on a single lot. Right now, basically, we have in fact done that by state law. The Housing Accountability Act requires us to approve something that is fully compliant with applicable standards. In this case, it's going to be setbacks and some other, height. The one I'm least enthused about is parking minimum requirements, but there is that as well. So we are talking about, the discussion we had actually was not specific to the number of units. It was more general. Let's see if there can be more objective standards that could be agreed upon. But certainly, I hear your point, Teresa, and I will be looking at what other cities are doing around single-family homes in that light.
Okay.
Yeah, did they get put on the website, or where do we get because the planning director did promise me at a public meeting that he would put the agendas and the minutes on the website.
For J-Sizzle?
Yeah.
They're not?
Yeah, they need to be.
Oh.
And he did promise that he would do that. Tim, is that his name? Tim Burrows? Timothy, yeah. He said he was going to, and they should be, and where are they?
They are on a City of Berkeley page, and I can't remember offhand the link, which is perhaps part of the problem, is everyone should know where that link is housed. But maybe...
we put that on our or minutes, like maybe it's like a little thing like the link.
Sure, and in the short term...
So people can get it.
Sure, in the short term, there was a fantastic memo that I put together probably a month ago that had summaries from DRC and LPC and the boards and commissions, so it's probably there. I'll go back and check, and I can put that up. But I think that's a great idea, though, having the links on the agendas.
Yeah, and we even could have the design review link.
I'm going to forward you now the... Oh, you...
Yeah, the J-Sizzle website does have it on.
Has it now?
I just loaded it, and it has the agenda and the minutes. Let's see.
Does it have the full packet?
Yeah, it has the agenda from last night's meeting and the minutes from the previous meeting.
Great. Does it have the full packet with all 200 pages of stuff?
I believe so. Let me make sure. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an agenda with a live link.
And how do you get to it? Is it through the zoning board, or what is it? Where do you get to it? Like if you were looking for it, how would you know?
Yeah, I found it from an email, which doesn't help you.
Here it is. It's commission, so it's actually listed as a separate commission now. It's under the commission's site, and it's the joint subcommittee for the implementation of state housing laws homepage.
So it's not a, it's
not under the ZAB
yes.
website.
Is it under the council? Is it under the ZAB? It's not under the,
It's
is there a place under?
commissions.
It's a separate commission?
Yes.
A tab for the commission.
Yeah. cityofberkeley.info/clerk/commission/joint subcommittee for the implementation of state housing laws homepage.aspx. That's easy.
But is it listed, where they have the A through Z? Is it listed under J? Where you click on J and.
It should be.
Anyway, I think it's important for the public to know.
Thank you,
and
Denise.
also
Yeah, we'll look
because,
into it, Teresa.
Yeah, I think it's really important for
Good
people
feedback.
to be able to access it.
I agree.
Because it's important information that's happening.
Yeah, it's in there. I just checked it.
Okay. So I think that concludes, unless there's anything more to add, our report for the subcommittee report for J-Sizzle. Is there anything for design review?
Just one thing.
Turn on your mic, please.
Yes, when I was here last, I promised to speak with the secretary to the Design Review Committee, Ann Burns, to determine if and when replacement would have to be made for Burton Edwards. And I was incorrect. He's got a couple more years So not an issue, and just wanted to report back.
Great. Anything else about design review? Teresa?
Yeah, what about the request?
So that is, it is still on my to-do list. I'm sorry I don't have a report to make this evening, but I will work harder to prioritize that for the next
Anything we can
meeting.
do to help? Like, can I call the clerk? Or who,
Sure.
who is it, the clerk or is it the city attorney?
It's a city, I would start with the city clerk.
City clerk, okay.
Great.
That's in terms of getting substitutes for the DRC.
Right. So no report on that, but we will have one soon, either from Teresa or from staff. Okay, so that's all design review has to say, and I believe that adjourns our meeting.
Oh,
Igor has his hand up, though.
yeah.
Dude,
Oh, no. Well, it is with a heavy heart that I move to adjourn this meeting in honor and memory of Rob Browning.
okay. So just second that, okay. All right, the meeting's adjourned in honor of Rob Browning. All
Thank
right,
you.
and it is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good job, Chair.
Good job. Madam Chair?
So I can't find the Pasadena ones on my phone, but I think it's because it can't handle the information.
I mean, I'm sure it's on Pasadena's website.
Your phone is not objectively handling the information.
So what
But I
is
sent you,
Optico Design?
so Opticos Design is a Berkeley architecture.
Do you want
firm
these
that
back?
does- Basically, is one of the nationwide experts in home-based codes. They write them for all kinds of cities, and Dan Kulola, the principal, is also one of the advocates of this missing places. It's more, you know, like form-based, you have a pitch roof and a building of a certain size, and within it, you kind of do, like what we've been talking about, allow uses to move within the building and be a certain size. So he's a thinker on how to control building form, and building form is objective. Right, all except that page. So it's not, he didn't come to it by seeking objective standards, but that way of looking at the world yields objectives. So it's a useful thing to look at. San Francisco has residential design guidelines. Some of them are, you know, they're all based on the time and place that they were developed, and again, this notion of objective standards didn't exist. But it talks about breaking down blocks and street walls and massing breaks in buildings and window reveals and sort of
The downtown area has a certain feel to it if you want to create.
Yeah,
So I was very
that's-
skeptical, until you
downtown.
said San Francisco, I was really skeptical that what
No,
you're talking about
Pasadena is
would
not
result